video, I'll be showing you how to study anatomy, or at least how I study anatomy. When I first started drawing, I remember studying anatomy was rather daunting because the human body is made up of so many different shapes and body parts. I didn't know where to start, or why things are connected the way they were, or how was I even gonna learn what muscle group was what, and like what was important and what wasn't. So in today's video, I hope to show you where I started with anatomy, so maybe it can make your process a bit easier. Before I get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, Skillshare, who has been a long-time friend of the channel. Skillshare is an incredible online learning community where everyone can explore, enroll, and even teach a wide range of classes, from photography and graphic design to music, cooking, businessing, marketing, lifestyle, and much more. There's something for everyone. Anatomy and figure drawing, although I have some knowledge about, I love seeing how other artists approach anatomy and what I can learn from them. The classes that I've been taking about anatomy is by Robert Marzullo. Although I've taken many classes, the two classes that stood out the most to me is figure drawing, starting with basics form, and learning the basics for improving your figure drawing, where he touches on basic anatomy, which is super interesting in the way he approaches shapes and the way he explains things, action lines, gesture drawings, and proportions. I am feasting on all the new ways to approach anatomy, and I look forward to learning more from him. I definitely recommend checking out his classes if, after this video, you're interested in seeing different approaches to anatomy. Whether you're pursuing hobbies or aiming to turn your skills into a career, start investing in yourself. This summer with Skillshare, Skillshare has thousands of classes covering virtually every skill imaginable. Skillshare is giving 1 month free to the first 500 viewers. To use my link in the description box. I highly recommend taking advantage of this opportunity if you're eager for easy and enjoyable learning. Thank you so much again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and now on to how I draw anatomy. There are two types of ways to study anatomy: individually and as a whole. Since the body is made out of different shapes and body parts, you need to learn each individual body part separately, and then you also need to learn the entire body with its proportions as a whole. I will show you how I do both in this video. So which one do you do first? It really doesn't matter as long as you start somewhere. I for one found learning to draw the entire body, like proportions and flow and shape, easier to tackle first, and then getting into the more nitty-gritty of individual body parts later. First, anatomy does not have to be perfect. You can always get away with things looking a bit off or kind of funky. It is art, so things don't always have to make sense, so don't stress too much about getting anatomy perfect. The most important thing is understanding the flow and some of the proportions. Other than that, you don't really have to stress too much about it. So first things first, where do you find reference? I find Pinterest has great anatomy reference, simple searching up like anatomy poses, anatomy references, and then going from there and scrolling until you find something that works for you is what I do. There are also websites like r/sketch daily references and line of action where you can pick your preferences and then go from there. So it's kind of like flashcards that they pull up of like anatomy or body parts. It's really cool. But they do have nudity, so that is a bit of a warning. If that makes you uncomfortable, don't visit that website. Okay, so let's get into studying the whole body and the techniques that I use. So breaking down reference. This is where you go in and draw on a reference the basic shapes of the body so you can see how they connect and figure out what shapes can be used to break down the body to your understanding, and then redrawing that pose to really set that into muscle memory. This one's a bit more of a focus study, unlike some of the others that I'll show you, and will take more time and dedication. I spend about 5 to 10 minutes on each of these bodies. When I'm breaking down anatomy, I'm using shapes that help me understand the body better, but you might be more comfortable using different shapes. Don't worry about comparing the way you'll draw anatomy to others or even me. Your style and approach to anatomy might be completely unique to yourself, and what works for me might not work for you. So embrace your individuality and experiment with different techniques and shapes. I have a whole video on the shapes that I use to break down anatomy over here. So when I'm redrawing the reference that I've just broken down, I'm paying attention to where the body parts are, how and where they connect to the body, and the direction of the spine and the chest. I'm concentrated on how the body parts can bend and how they can't bend. I'm also trying to keep the shapes the same for each of the bodies I'm drawing, since I am trying to learn what shapes work best, and if I'm changing them up every reference, it's not going to work. And most importantly, the thing that I'm looking at is the proportions. When I'm redrawing, I'm paying really close attention to the bodies that I've broken down. I'm looking at where the body part ends and where it begins, and how these body parts kind of interact with each other. So for example, with this piece, I can see that his one hand is just below his shoulder blade, so that's where I was going to put it. I can see that his other hand is a bit more stretched out, like I'm looking at this space between his arm and his torso. So I'm kind of just like paying more attention to that when I'm redrawing. The next study that I do is called figure drawing, which involves looking at the body and trying to capture its essence, with a heavy emphasis on the figure of the human body shape, flow, and posture. So when drawing the figure, look at it less as a body and more as a flow or action line, and then shapes packed onto that line. Pay attention to where the body curves and where the weight of the pose is. These are a lot of fun and less intense than the previous, and I suggest doing these pretty quickly. So when you're drawing them, keep your strokes long and heavy and focus as the previous. I normally give myself 2 to 3 minutes per figure. When drawing these, I stop focusing so much on the shape and the muscle of the anatomy, and more on capturing the outline of the body and the action or flow line. These are great practice if you tend to overthink anatomy a bit, since these are less pressure on perfection and more on looking like a figure. Remember, every stroke and mistake that you make brings you closer to getting better at anatomy. So don't get discouraged by mistakes, or if you don't get it right, always try. They're just all part of the learning process. Keep going, and eventually you'll figure it out.
Eventually.
Here's all the very first anatomy studies that I ever did. They were very whack and not accurate to the photo at all, but I had to go through this to be able to get to where I am now.
Eventually.
The next one is called gesture drawing, which focuses more on the movement and the flow of the body instead of its details. So less details than the figure drawings, and way less details than the actual reference breakdown drawings. They kind of look like stick figures, in a way. So don't you dare comment, I can't
This one does a lot of
stick
damage,
figure,
dude. Holy
because
shit.
yes you can, and it's part of the learning process drawing stick figures. So how you do gesture drawings, or at least how I understand it, is by looking at how the reference flows, so it's action lines. I determine this by the shoulders and the spine's direction and line, and where the body weight lies, trying not to add or put too much emphasis on the shape and more emphasis on the lines, basically. So you're trying to communicate the body through less and more through lines. I really hope that makes sense. It's more focused on just trying to get the figure down on paper as quick as possible. When I draw these, I spend less than 30 seconds to about a minute on each of them. Now you're wondering, why are these important to practice? Because this will basically help so much with getting flow and natural look to your anatomy when you're drawing. Because rather than focusing on actual anatomy shapes now, you're focusing on the way the body is going to be moving, which is very important if you're trying to capture a more natural look to your figures and your character illustrations. And finally is the more in-depth studies. This is more hectic of all the studies, but it is important. It's going in and redrawing the reference more precisely and more realistically. So it's realism studies, basically. But I promise this will help you in the long run. I do these both in black and white and in color, but I feel like the black and white helps me a lot more to understand the shading of the body. When doing these more in-depth realism studies, I suggest marble figures to learn muscles and the planes of the bodies, because it's a lot easier to see it, and I don't know, the light just kind of like catches differently on marble figures for some reason. So it's easier for my brain to kind of like absorb the information that I'm looking at. You don't have to do the studies exactly the way I'm doing it, so I'm taking a more painty approach to it, so going in and rendering the details. You can use line art, you can use a more clear sketch. With all these studies, you can do them how you feel would benefit your art style and help you build your knowledge and muscle memory of anatomy. These speed paints are really fast. If you're interested in seeing a more slowed down version of these clips, I will have them free on my Patreon, the free member section. I will have all of them uploaded over there. So if you're interested in that, you can go check that out. So that's everything for the figure itself. Now the cool thing is that all of these studies are going to build on top of each other. So let's say when you go in and you're drawing a body, you're going to start with the gesture lines to get the flow of the anatomy, and then you're going to add a figure, and then you're going to add the anatomy shapes on top of that, and then you'll add the shading, which is what you learned for realism. So they all are really necessary to study to make anatomy easier and make it look good at the end of the day. Now getting into studying the individual parts of anatomy, it's pretty much the same, but you pick a part of the body that you'll be focusing on. For individual body parts, I focus a lot more on breaking it down into shapes that make sense to me, and then redrawing that, and then also doing more detailed paintings of the body shape parts. So you don't need to know each muscle by name, but knowing the bare shape is good. Like, I'm not sure what this muscle is by the arm, or why it connects to the boob like that, but all I know is, hey, this is what it looks like, and I'll try my best to replicate it each time I draw the arm connecting to the chest. With studies like these, what you're trying to build is muscle memory. Now, I'm kind of dumb. I cannot remember most things like muscle groups or proportions very well. I also struggle a lot with picturing things clearly in my head, so what I rely on most is muscle memory. So if you draw something over and over again, eventually you'll start remembering how to draw it without having to fully grasp what's going on, or like think so hard on it that like it exhausts you. So that's the end goal, is to be able to draw something without having to think so much about it. I know when you start learning anatomy or you start drawing anatomy, there's so much that you're thinking about constantly, and that can become really draining and really lead to burnout. Remember, learning anatomy is a journey that requires patience and persistence. Even when you encounter challenges and you feel like you're not making progress, remember that every minute you spend studying and practicing, it is an investment into your future skills. Keep pushing forward, and you'll eventually be able to keep practicing and keep trying, and eventually you'll start grasping things in your own way. So my next video will be an update on my previous anatomy video on like the shapes that I use when I draw anatomy. Since this one was more about how to study, so I will see you then, and thank you so much for watching this whole video. I appreciate it. I've been making videos for such a long time, and I still don't know how to end videos, so yeah, I love you, bye.
What we got?
Hi everyone, this is Sarah. So a few days ago, I came across this article that I was so afraid to click on because it was telling me that I was doing it all wrong. So I finally cracked it open and took a brief look at it. And I was shocked to see how right they are. I mean, whoever wrote this article, whoever that might be. So I kept reading, and man, I was sucked into this thing. It was amazing. It made a huge ton of sense. It was like a bucket of ice poured down my bare brain. I could not believe that I was doing it all wrong. Although I always had a little voice at the back of my mind telling me, Sarah, you might want to dial it down a bit. It seems to be ruining your focus. And it shows. But as I kept ignoring the voice, the problem got bigger and bigger. And I was multitasking even more intensely. And my brain was even more agitated. And then I read the article. I was like, huh, have I been ruining my brain thinking I was getting more done now? Okay, maybe I shouldn't do the eggs. Oh no, that can't be true. I mean, come on. I've been priding myself on my productive little secret, although I was always in an agonizing rush, but at least I kept getting things done. I mean, come on. Can't you see how much I stuffed my brain with information while doing passive chores? How much of those dead hours I have resurrected only by plugging myself in while doing it? What, you're saying all of this was a sham and I have not gained anything other than just some cracks on my gray matter? I thought to myself, that can't be true. But then it hit me. It hit me like a brick wall. I remember that I'm thinking with a brain that is a bit broken, according to the article. How could I even trust my brain now? Yeah. That's how strange it gets. Okay, enough of that. Before I go completely insane, I'm gonna read this article and put it into this brain battle once and for all. Okay, let's see what it's blabbering on about. So let's read it together. A number of studies show multitasking makes you less efficient and effective. Alright, okay, that seems a bit scary, but go on. Other research shows multitasking actually makes you stupid. Huh. Okay, alright, now we're getting straight into the battle. Alright, I can see where this is going, but keep going, man. I'm not scared. I eat philosophy for dinner. Neuroscience is just a snack. A study published in the New Atlantic found that multitasking lowers your IQ by 10 points. I get it. You're telling me I'm just 10 times dumber now. A bit insulting, but we're gonna keep reading, okay? We're stronger than that. As the researchers write, it's really not that amusing that the most common productivity tools like email, Slack, text, etc. can make one as dumb as a stoner. Researchers write, it's not amusing at all, given the fact that most of us actually do those things. And it says, that's why productive people focus on doing one thing at a time. They do that one thing incredibly well, and then they move on to whatever is next. They do that incredibly well as well, alright? I think they could have just said they don't multitask. Was it so hard to boil it down to one word? And it says that they don't parallel process, simply because it's impossible. If you think about it, we can't hold two thoughts in our brain simultaneously. So yeah, you may be working on two things at once, but not really. You're doing a whole lot of switching back and forth, and that switching comes at a cost. So it goes on to give the example of Napoleon and his mental cupboards. Let's see what is the cupboard theory. So Napoleon, if you don't know Napoleon, I can tell you a bit about that guy, if I may. Where do I begin? Basically, he's a former emperor of the French, whatever that means. Basically, a great guy, a genius leader. Yeah, I did an extensive research for you guys. You're gonna appreciate that. So now that we all know quite a bit about Napoleon, let's proceed. Here's how those cupboard works. Napoleon was able to compartmentalize his life to quite a remarkable degree. He could entirely close off one part of his mind to what was going on in the rest of it. He himself likened it to being able to open and close drawers in a cupboard. And while I was reading this, I was like, heck, that sounds familiar. That sounds like when my ADHD kicks in. It's a very clear description of my hyperfixation, that's for sure. What's going on here? So the article goes on to say, well, that sounds more like attention deficit than focus. Keep in mind that Napoleon, like you, had a lot going on. We may not be trying to take over Europe, but we all wear many hats. Plus, Napoleon wasn't attempting to parallel process. He was a relentless serial processor. And Napoleon himself goes on to say, different subjects and different affairs are arranged in my head as in a cupboard. When I wish to interrupt one train of thought, I shut that drawer and open another. Do I wish to sleep? I simply close all the drawers, and there I am, asleep. But wait a minute, I read all of this, and I'm still in the dark about my specific problem. Do I get dumber when I'm listening to something while doing a mentally passive activity like washing the dishes? So I kept scouring through this article, and it has an answer. It says if one or more tasks are capable of being automated as reflexes, meaning it's like very habitual and it's almost done without your awareness, like a muscle memory type of situation. If that is the case, then they can easily be engaged simultaneously with another task without much consequences. And there's another interesting part of this article. It reads, simple physical tasks that require little to no thought aren't distracting. In fact, as some studies show, doing mindless tasks can actually boost your level of creativity and innovation. So I have to say something here. I figure that when I am physically active, for instance, when I'm exercising or even drawing on paper, I have such a better focus. And I find myself coming up with ideas faster than when I'm less active. Also, I find it extremely easier to focus on a podcast or audiobooks while I am doing mindless chores. I mean, there has to be something there. And to string it back to the cupboard analogy, it says, in this case, if you open one cupboard to do something you don't have to think about, then it's okay to crack open another cupboard. And no one says your entire focus has to be applied to unloading the dishes. So there you have it. I wasn't actually losing my mind. You can trust me now. But what was making me dumber was listening to something while in the
Did that remind you of anything?
And I knew that it
No.
was wrong. Because in the beginning of
Yes,
the
it
drawing,
did.
you have to focus on coming up
That
with
sounds
the
like
shapes
You
and
know what
forms
reminds
of
me
the
of?
objects you want to
Scene
draw.
with
And
Toby
there's
and
like no
Jojo.
space in your mind that can be dedicated
You're
to
right, you're
something
so right,
else.
and he just
So
pulled
if
purple
you
and kills
want
him.
to listen to something while drawing, you can do it when you're in the very passive
Alright, I guess
stages
that's
of
the beach
drawing,
now.
when you're actually just coloring it and you don't need to think too much about any sort of processes that you're going through. So you have to keep in mind that if it does take a bit of focus, then you have to completely just get rid of all the noises in the background and just be doing it in the silence. Because silence actually heals your brain in a way. Focus is the foundation of creativity. So the only thing that we need to be so freaking vigilant about is improving our focus and doing activities that challenges our brain to focus on a deeper level. And also doing activities like exercise, walking, and painting on a big canvas. Because you get to use your hand in a way, and it's just going to engage your brain on a deeper level. I can vouch for that. If you're dealing with natural paint, you're gonna be much more focused, like not digital, okay? You can switch to traditional for a while just to improve your focus. And yeah, that's it. I thought that I'd let you know on what I learned from this article. Have a nice day and stay creative.
life syndrome. So we use this term life syndrome to basically describe this group of people whose lives are so bad, as they are trying to survive in life, they run into mental health challenges. They go somewhere, they get diagnosed with a particular thing, and then just rack up these diagnoses. I remember seeing this mentioned in an HG video a while ago, but I don't remember which one it was. I'm sure it's not an empirical medical phenomenon or anything, but whatever it resembles, I'm curious about the outcomes of the people who suffer from it. Is there such a thing in living in living in a situation that is systemically unhealthy to the point that there isn't any viable path to good mental health can people overcome shit life syndrome. Some time ago, I talked about this term shit life syndrome. So when I was a second year resident maybe intern at Massachusetts General Hospital, I was working with a very, very talented nurse practitioner. She would go see patients, and then I would ask her, what's the diagnosis of the patient? And then sometimes she would say that this patient has shit life syndrome. And so I was really intrigued by the term, and I would ask her, what does that mean? And she would basically say, okay, so you have these people who come into the emergency room, and if you look at what their diagnosis is, they have 15. They have ADHD, PTSD, oppositional defiant disorder. These were oftentimes children or adolescents, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and polysubstance use. So they have all of these different diagnoses. And the thing about these diagnostic constructs is that the idea that someone has 6 different independent brain pathologies or mental health pathologies that are all concurrent is exceedingly rare. And so we use this term shit life syndrome to basically describe this group of people whose lives are so bad that as they are trying to survive in life, they run into mental health challenges. They go somewhere, they get diagnosed with a particular thing, and they just rack up these diagnoses. So this is where the term shit life syndrome comes from. So how to tell the difference between mental disorders and shit life syndrome? I've been trying to answer this question for a while. How do I know what's the cause and what's the effect when it comes to mental state? Am I depressed and suicidal because of how my life turned out? Or am I perceiving life to be more shitty than it is because of underlying mental disorders? I've never been to a psychiatrist, so I've never been diagnosed, but I've been dealing with OCD since I was 6. I experience a lot of MDD, anxiety, social phobia, and ADHD symptoms. I've also been suicidal for more than 6 years. The thing is, most of those things appear so small when put next to 7 figures in the bank account. Most of my issues would immediately disappear. Only then would I be able to do the things because I can, not because I have to. I experience what I'd call a money-induced paralysis. It's very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough that I deem worth pursuing for hours on end. Those realizations alone are enough to make me apathetic, procrastinate on all matters, and basically give up on life and wait for the right opportunity to kill myself. I'd rather be dead than live a life I don't consider to be worth the effort. I've been thinking about seeing a psychiatrist for the past few months, but I have my doubts. I procrastinate on making an appointment because it feels like my problems stem from money, and it's not like they'll make me rich over there. That is enough justification for me not to go. I also can't get myself to schedule other appointments, blood tests, physio, dentist, because if my life will remain the same despite improving in some areas, then why bother? I'll kill myself anyway without some magical epiphany occurring in my mind. I suspect there could be something wrong with my brain because plenty of other people have lives objectively worse
are you live right now?
yet they see survival as something of value in of itself. That could be the result of them being ignorant, me being ungrateful, or my brain being disabled. So some of us look at our lives and we say that things are objectively bad. And we look at our lives and we think,
I was watching random videos while I was
my
streaming,
internal
so
instrument is useless
that's why I
if
was
my circumstances are bad, right? So we can say okay, I'm short, I'm bald, my chances of ending up with someone seem very, 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 very low, so what's the point in trying? My life is objectively bad. And so then the question is okay, is this mental illness, is this an appropriate adaptation to negative circumstances? Or is this a mental illness that is misinterpreting what my chances are?
That's Dr. K.
The short answer is that
From what I know about him, he used to be a monk,
I believe that you can
apparently, and then he was a monk, and then he went into psychiatry, and he also plays video games, so he made a channel, Healthy Gamer, and he gives pretty interesting
problems and you have internal problems. And the problem is that
he gives pretty interesting information on certain stuff.
Even when you're subjectively hampering yourself, it is very difficult to fix your situation. Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. It combines over 2 decades of my experience of both being a monk and a psychiatrist, and distills all of the most important things I've learned into a choose-your-own-adventure format. So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today. So what is the difference between a setback and a failure? So in both cases, the objective reality can be the same. I tried something and I failed. The difference between a setback and a failure is whether I decide to try again. And if I try again and then I succeed, then the failure becomes a setback. And if I decide to stop at that point, the failure becomes a failure. It is very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. Those realizations alone are enough to make me apathetic, procrastinate on all matters, and basically give up on life, right? So this is where we have to be very, very, very careful. Because now what we see is that there is a objective circumstance on the outside, which results in a realization, and then that realization creates apathy, procrastination, and people giving up. And then what is responsible for you staying stuck? It is actually a combination of all of these things. It is a false dichotomy. So let's talk a little bit about shit life syndrome. So this is a psychodynamic article that someone kind of talks about shit life syndrome. So this is what's really interesting is shit life syndrome is something that clinicians came up with. So let's read this case, okay? In the letter from the doctor, we learned that she had experienced a number of problems since early childhood. She had initially been raised in foster care, bad thing number one. Abused by a neighbor, bad thing number 2. Left home at only 17, bad thing number 3. Subsequently engaged in a series of emotionally and sexually abusive relationships with men, bad thing number 4. This is shit life syndrome. This person, it appears, does not have a chance. Bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. And there's a lot of data that supports that this is what happens, right? So we have a lot of studies on something called adverse childhood experiences, which is that if you have a upbringing, what tends to happen is that this correlates with worse mental health outcomes, worse life outcomes. This is very common. So I've since become very curious about this expression, shit life syndrome. Not the least because of the implicit consensus by everyone in the meeting, including myself, as to what it meant. Everyone knows what it means, even though it's never been defined. The phrase seemed to denote a level of long-standing poverty, family breakdown, lack of stability, unemployment, and potential risk factors common to many of the predominantly young, working-class patients referred to the service. For shit, of course, is something that we generally prefer not to think about, something we continually reject, get rid of, or hide. At the same time, it is something that we cannot completely repudiate. It is part of us, something we need, something that is ineluctably, I don't even know what that means, part of our status as human beings as subjects. Those suffering from shit life syndrome then would seem to be those individuals whose problems are deemed to be so terrible, so untouchable, that they quite literally cannot be thought about and cannot be handled by the service. No amount of you coming to my office 1 hour a week for therapy is going to fix your history of abuse, your problems with employment, your foster care background, your history of trauma, the ADHD, the OCD. There's no amount of therapy that will fix this objectively bad thing. And so we call this shit life syndrome, right? Because it's like, it's too much to handle. The question is, can we do something about it? And my belief is yes. So there is this construct that we have discovered in mental health called deaths of despair. I think this was originally discovered actually in the UK. So there were these old fishing villages that used to have very robust economies. And then once like the fishing industry left, the town became like a ghost town. There's no economy. People started drinking. People started committing suicide. And as we tunnel down into why are people killing themselves, what we discovered is that there's a lot of systemic factors that are causing this. What we find is everyone in this town is an alcoholic and is suicidal. Not everyone, but the rates are way higher. And then in this neighboring town where things are socioeconomically better, like the climate is the same, the water is the same, but like the economic situation is different, we see way less suicide and alcoholic liver disease, among other things. So systemic and problems have systemic solutions. I 100% believe this. This is part of the reason we started Healthy Gamer in the first place. So I want y'all to really think about this. Why did we start this? Because I saw a systemic problem that I realized no amount of like talking to people in my office is going to fix. What I saw in my office was an increasing number of people who did not know how to live life. They didn't know how they work. And since you don't know how you work, you can't figure out how to live life. So this is what I want y'all to understand. You are a living organism. And the whole point of a living organism is that it interacts and is shaped by its environment. We are in a homeostatic relationship with our environment. We adapt to our environment. We shape our environment. So it goes both ways. So if it's hot outside, I will start to sweat. If it is cold outside, that's called diaphoresis. If it's cold outside, I will have piloerection, which means I will have goosebumps and my hair will stand on it. My physical body adapts to the circumstances around me in order to try to succeed in this scenario. So when we say that people with shit life syndrome, is this shit life syndrome, is this mental illness? The answer is both. Mental illness is oftentimes the consequence or the adaptation to negative circumstances. Okay? So I'll give you all a simple example. We consider PTSD a mental illness. And why is it a mental illness? Because it does not allow human beings to live their life normally. But what we also know about PTSD is that it is an adaptation. It is a mechanism of survival that the organism goes through. So as a simple example of this, if I've been traumatized in some way, my body is on high alert. My heart rate goes up, my blood pressure goes up, I start to think more catastrophically, which is not a bug, it's a feature, it's an adaptation. When the brain is faced with danger, we need to focus on the worst case scenarios, not the middle of the road scenario. The problem is that these adaptations, which allow us to survive, prevent us from thriving, because these two goals are fundamentally different. So the problem in shit life syndrome is that the way that you wire is not to succeed, it is to survive. Now, I want y'all to think about the implications of that. Really think about that. For example, like I'll give y'all just a couple of examples. So one thing that we develop is something like low self-esteem. Or, we talk about this in the trauma guide, one of the things that we see in shit life syndrome is the inability to consider the future. So if we look at this post and you read it, this person is not future oriented. They are not planning for the future. They are not doing steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are simply existing and responding to the environment. They are apathetic, they procrastinate, and they're not exerting an influence to change their situation. Now, people can call this laziness, but it's not laziness, it's an adaptation. So let's understand this. I'll give you all just one example. So when someone grows up in a deficient environment, an environment that does not have stimulation, what happens is if we grow up in an environment where we are not allowed to plan for the future, if we grow up in an environment where our circumstances control our future, our brain loses sight of the ability to plan for the future. Okay, so I'll give you all a simple example. Let's say I'm a kid and I want to have a birthday party because all my friends have a birthday party. So I go to my mom and my dad and I say, hey, Mom and Dad, can I have a birthday party this weekend with my friends? And your mom and dad say, sure. Then what happens is if you think about being a 7-year-old, you can't plan your own birthday party. You don't know how to order cake. You don't know how to invite friends. You don't know how to do any of that. So it is your parents' responsibility to do all of those things. But if you have a single parent household and your parent is working 3 jobs, if you have parents who struggle with substance use, if you have parents who don't know how to operationalize their own problems because they have a history of trauma, they don't know how to make your birthday party. And so what happens is you have, or in the worst case scenario, your parents say, yeah, we can have a birthday party. And then the day before the birthday party, one of your parents is drunk and angry, and they arbitrarily punish you for nothing that you did wrong. And they say, you don't get a birthday party because you're making too much noise, you don't understand how to be respectful, unrespectful kids, disrespectful kids don't deserve birthday parties. Now, when you grow up in an environment like this, what is the cost of thinking about the future? Just pain. You told all your friends, hey, I'm going to have a birthday party, and what happens? Your birthday party gets canceled. Now you're ashamed. Now you feel disappointed. Now you feel like your expectations have been let down. So what we see in research from complex PTSD especially is that the capacity for your brain to think about
Dude, how do you get yours back so quick? I don't get mine back at all.
And you think about the future, that is rewarded.
Domain.
But if thinking about the future leads to a punishment, leads to expectations that get down, to suffering, then your brain is like, this is a waste of time. thinking
Well,
about
I
it for the
figured out how to
future
use target
only
lock.
results in pain and nothing good ever comes of it.
Hey,
So we're
Jack,
going to
let me
stop
pull
thinking
your head
about
off.
the future. Then the
Hmm?
problem is that these
Let me
adaptations
rip your head
cause
off.
future problems because you don't know how
Wow.
to craft a life that like is fulfilling, right? So this person may not
kill you
even
now.
know, like they say, like pursuing a passion. I don't know how to pursue a passion. So the adaptations that we use to survive are the very things that prevent us from thriving. Now, here's the really tricky thing, is it turns out that these adaptations that you make will be deterministically bad for you in the future, okay? So remember that the organism is in homeostasis with the environment. We're trying to survive. So we're forming certain kinds of adaptations. So if we look at some of these adaptations, what we find is that these adaptations will become problematic in the future. So what we know is that when people have a history of trauma and when they suffer from depression, which by the way can be an appropriate, like almost like an adaptation or maladaptation from your circumstances. So here's the chain of reasoning, okay? Adverse childhood experiences increase the risk of depression. So if you've had a shit life, you are more likely to have depression. Once you add depression into the mix, that creates perspective problems. So there are multiple theories behind this, but they're basically all agree that there's some kind of bias in our mind. So we have memory biases. This is wild. So what we know is that there are memory biases in depression. So a memory bias for negative material found that individuals diagnosed with depression recalled more generic or overgeneral memories than did their non-depressed counterparts, okay? So this is kind of weird, but what this means is that people with depression do not remember like positive details. Importantly, the tendency to elaborate negative emotional information, memory bias for this information, and recall of overgeneral memories may be associated with other cognitive aspects of depression. So these are the three biases. Is this mental illness or is this shit life syndrome? Illness is a consequence of two things: a genetic predisposition plus an environmental exposure. So there is something that is part of you plus some environmental shaping results in something called a mental illness. And this is really consistent with our studies of things like depression and adverse childhood experiences. So if I have a crappy life, my mind starts to get depressed. The depression is a consequence of my past, but it very actively and negatively shapes my future. So we know that once you have some negative view of yourself, it changes the way you perceive the world. You pay attention to more negative stimuli. So if we look at this paper, what we basically find is that if you're looking at a neutral face, you will pick up negativity even within neutrality. So what we know about cognitive bias and depression is, let's say that I have multiple interactions throughout the day. 25% of my interactions are positive, 25% of my interactions are negative, and 50% of my interactions are neutral. Once I have a cognitive bias from depression, what this means is that I tend to overgeneralize the positive parts of my memory. So the positive parts of my memory become vague and fuzzy. The negative parts of my memory are negative, and then the neutral parts become negative. So now in a life that is 25% good, 25% bad, and 50% in the middle, my brain interprets this is 75% bad and 25% neutral. And this is where, I know it sounds crazy, but like the reason that I think shit life syndrome can get better is because there are 3 steps to this. There is circumstances which are outside of control. Create an adaptation. This adaptation creates your destiny. Now this you can't control, but this you can fix. And when you fix this, this changes. So that's what we're gonna talk about today. So now the question is how. So I'm gonna give you all just a couple of really simple examples of how you can change your thinking and what I see in people who have shit life syndrome and people who don't. So first is when people don't grow up with adverse childhood experiences or in high socioeconomic status, the first thing that's different is that people in shit life syndrome do not think that they can shape their future. If I have shit life syndrome, I grow up in an environment where my intentions do not shape my circumstances. I'm so neglected in my household that my desires become worthless. They have no bearing on the environment. So once our brain realizes that our desire has no differential impact on the environment, it decides, let's forget about desire. Compare that to what we see in the worst cases as entitlement in people who have high socioeconomic status, where the world says, hey, you don't get to jump to the front of the line, and their cognitive bias is so robust that they say, everyone else needs to move out of the way. They believe that they are allowed to shape the environment, right? So this is a huge difference. And it leads to a huge difference in outcomes. What shit life syndrome teaches you is that what you do does not matter. This is the lesson that you learn. And once you learn this lesson, then your future is determined. The beautiful thing is that you can unlearn this lesson. And when you unlearn this lesson and you discover that you can shape your circumstances, then a lot of things will go well. So I want you all to just think about two people when faced with some set of challenges. One person believes that if I'm challenged, there's nothing I can do about it. And the other person believes there is something I can do about it. I don't have to take it laying down. What impact do you think those two attitudes will have on these people's lives? So that's the first adaptation, is simply believing that you can affect your life or you can't. Can I shape my circumstances or can I not shape my circumstances? And I'm not saying that people are stupid for believing they can't shape their circumstances. Remember that if they believe this for a good reason. It is because they haven't shaped their circumstances. So this is the other thing about the human organism. The human organism learns from the past, and it carries that forward into the future. Now, the problem is that sometimes the learning that we do is maladaptive. So I'll give you all a great example of this. So I don't know if y'all played Dark Souls 1, but in Dark Souls 1, there's this like cheat kind of thing that you can do. There's this dragon, and you can shoot the dragon in the tail. And if you shoot it enough times, the tail falls off, and you get this thing called the Dragon Tail Sword. Now, the Dragon Tail Sword is OP. You can one-shot a lot of enemies. So when I first played Dark Souls 1, I got the Dragon's Tail Sword because someone told me about it. And then I was one-shotting all the enemies, and then I gave up on the game because it became too hard. Because at some point, the Dragon Tail Sword stops scaling, and you can't one-shot anything. So later, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, you know what? The Dragon Tail Sword is the biggest scam in the game. It is the biggest noob trap in the game. No wonder you gave up. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, if you get the Dragon Tail Sword, you never learn how to play the game. You don't need to roll. You don't need to parry. You don't need to like zone people out. You don't need to pay attention. It is such a crutch. So the way that I learned to play the game based on my circumstances set me up for failure in the future. Now, if I ask you, okay, so if I play with the Dragon Tail Sword, does this mean that I can't beat Dark Souls? Of course not. But it requires you to adapt your general approach to the game. And this is exactly what shit life syndrome is like. It's very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. These realizations make me jump to a conclusion. So the way that I would, I've had patients like this before, and there are things that you can do to change this. Right? So what I'd say is, oh, that's so interesting. So unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. So then I would talk to this person, this is like what I've done, right? Is I'd ask them, what is the nature of interest? What determines how interested you are? Is there anything that you can do to change your level of interest in something? Realizations are alone are enough to make me apathetic. Okay, so let's talk about being apathetic. If you are apathetic, does that mean that you cannot act? What is the relationship between feeling like acting and being able to act? So as you start to dig into a lot of these nuances, you start to see a lot of positive change. Because it's this stuff that is truly deterministic. But my point is that the adaptations to survive will oftentimes keep you from thriving. And so you need to unlearn those adaptations. And one of the most important things that I want y'all to pay attention to is how quickly your mind jumps to a conclusion. I can bet y'all money, because I've seen this before, anytime I talk about super challenging things, what inevitably happens is someone will respond. Dr. K was saying this, and they will jump to some kind of conclusion. Are they saying I'm stupid? So think about even how you are receiving what I am saying. Are you looking at it critically, or is some part of your mind jumping up and saying this is wrong? There are 1,000 different things that your mind will jump to so quickly. And look at where all of those thoughts go. All of those thoughts result in inaction. That's the problem. Look at where your mind goes. This is a paper that shows that when you have a low perceived control, when you don't believe you are in control of your life, that creates stressful situations. So our perception and results indicated that dependent interpersonal stress mediated the relationship between low perceived control and higher levels of social anxiety in girls. Conversely, boys who exhibited low perceived control experienced a greater occurrence of dependent interpersonal stressors. So this is really important to understand. When you believe you are out of control, this creates stressors. What this paper really shows us is that it is the perception of low perceived control that creates problems in your life. And I'll give you all an example if you're skeptical of that. So let's say that I have a family emergency and I have a big paper due in 1 week. And I need to email my professor to let them know. There's a voice in my head that says, hey, let your professor know that you have a family emergency. But then what happens is I procrastinate. Or I think maybe I can get the paper done. Or maybe I think I don't feel good. It makes me feel ashamed to ask for an extension. There is a right action to take in this situation, but you procrastinate in doing the right action. And then what happens is a week goes by, you haven't worked on the paper, now it's the night before the paper is due. And now you begin to question yourself because you're like, now if I ask, like if I tell them, oh, there was a family emergency a week ago, but now I'm asking for an extension on the paper, the professor isn't going to believe me. They're going to think I'm making it up. I really should have done it a week ago. This anxiety creates a negative situation. If you had not been anxious in the first place, you would have sent the email. You'd have said, hey, I have a family emergency. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to get to the paper. Just wanted to let you know. We all know that is the right answer. And if you look at your life, you're fucking procrastinating. You know what the right answer is. The problem is you can't do it. And it is not that your life is randomly out of control. It's because you fucking neglect it. You procrastinate. That creates your situations. We see this so much in our life. I'm not saying bad things don't happen to us. Absolutely there's bad RNG. And now we get to really the crux of shit life syndrome, which is that in this life there are things that are outside of your control and things that are inside of your control. And the beautiful thing about the homeostatic nature of life, this isn't just humans, this is like even amoeba. When amoeba detect the wrong chemical gradient, they will move in the opposite direction. They're responding to life. And the problem that we have in shit life syndrome is that we cannot respond appropriately to life. I need to send my professor an email asking for an extension. That is what the situation demands. There is a right answer here. What is it that gets in the way of me engaging the right answer? This is what gets in the way. Interpretation bias, attentional bias. Oh my God, my professor will think I'm pathetic. Oh my God, he'll dislike me. Oh my God, this hasn't worked in the past. I've asked for help in the past and it hasn't worked. There's a memory bias there, but it doesn't mean that it's all false. So another big thing that people with shit life syndrome learn, and think about how devastating this is to learn. Asking for help doesn't help. Two kinds of people in life, those who ask for help and those who don't. And why does someone stop asking for help? Because they learn it's useless. All of the thoughts and beliefs that you have in your mind if you have shit life syndrome are warranted. They are justified. That does not make them right. This is a very important nuance to understand. You can have a lot of logic for believing what you believe, but the construct that you have in your brain does not dictate what happens in the future. So the first is even the belief of self-determination. The second is jumping to conclusions. The third is not asking for help. And the fourth thing that we also talked about is the loss of future orientation. This one is very hard. So if you look at some people, like you look at some of these people and they're like living a life. And part of living their life is like a dimension of future. This is so simple that it's like, I don't even know if this makes sense. You look at some people and they're doing shit in order. You guys know what I mean? They're like, today I'm training for a marathon in August of 2025. And I look at these people, I'm like, what the fuck, man? I'm trying to get through the week. And they're like, yeah, I have a bucket list. I'm like, bruh, I'm trying to survive the day. I'm just waiting for the next Dota patch to drop. How do you have a bucket? Like, I don't have a bucket list. Someone recently asked me, and they were like, what have you done on your bucket list? And I'm like, I don't have a bucket list. And then I was like, kind of like, is this because I'm yogically detached from my life and I'm like content with my life? Or is it because like when I was a fucking degenerate gamer and I was just like fucking waking up every day and playing video games for 20 hours a day, I stopped thinking about the future. I think it's a little bit of both. The concept that I can accomplish goals in my life is foreign to me. This idea, and think about the hubris of having a bucket list. This idea that if you set these random ass goals that are so far away that you will one day achieve even a portion of them. Like, what the fuck? Do y'all get how that's their brain is working differently? It is thinking about the future dimension as something that can be realized. And literally half of the people that I work with, and I mean half, okay? I think it's a pretty good estimate, because I work with losers and I work with winners. And the winners I work with have all these goals. And the losers that I work with don't have any. And it's like their mind operates in a different way. This too relates to trauma. So we know that, once again, surviving in a prisoner of war camp, thinking about the future is a waste of time, so our brain unlearns thinking about the future. So when we have shit life syndrome, is it bad? Absolutely. Is the deck stacked against you? Absolutely. But there is hope, because what is really holding you back is not the circumstances. That is what has held you back. That I completely agree, and this is a nuance that's important. But what holds you back, what's held you back for the last 5 years is different from what will hold you back for the next 5 years. And even remember, there's no future.
Some of the stuff he's like saying sounds funny. Like he was talking about the Dota patch and stuff.
All you're trying to do is survive. Every day is the same. And we see this so much. It's so sad in our community. I'm proud of this in a weird way, because this is a place where I want y'all to come and feel this. It's okay to feel this. We don't want you to feel ashamed of feeling this way. But people come here and they're like, I'm existing. I'm not living. So that's what we want to help you with. And the really sad thing about this is not fair. Forget about fair. We can get caught up in fair as much as you want to. I don't know about fair. It makes me sad. I don't think life is fair, right? I haven't seen that. I mean, I decided on this. My first rotation is a third-year medical student. I was 1 week into third year, and I decided fairness is fucked. All you have to do is spend 1 week in the pediatric ICU, and you'll realize fairness is a waste of, I don't even know how this works. There's a 6-year-old kid with glioblastoma multiforme. Actually, not a 6-year-old. Patient with glioblastoma multiforme was a couple of years later. That happens closer between 25 and 45 years old. With the kid, it was like a blood cancer, leukemia or something. Right? You look at this, and you're like, there's no fairness here. This is dumb. Right? And I'm thinking about this patient with glioblastoma. Well, like, just great dude, had kids, was happily married, and it's like, boom, one day you got a terminal cancer, you've got 3 months to live. Like, that's how glioblastoma multiforme hits you. It's a rapidly progressive, very debilitating. Doesn't happen when you're old, happens when you're young, when you're in the prime of your life. There's no fairness here, but there doesn't need to be fairness. That's the crazy thing, right? There's what you can control. And when you're looking for the world to fix your problems, like, I just have lost faith in the world. Like, I hate to say it. And now this is where y'all have to be careful, right? Because your negative bias, if you're depressed, will be, Dr. K has lost faith in the world, which means I should give up. No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I've lost faith in the world, but I've not lost faith in you. There's a huge difference. I don't count on the world to fix anything. That's why I'm here. Because I saw a generation of people whose lives were getting screwed. And I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to fix that. In fact, I went to people, so many smart people, so many compassionate people, so many dedicated people who are doing nothing about technology addiction, who are doing nothing to address rising suicide rates, rising unemployment rates in young men, who are doing nothing to address toxicity towards women online, stalking and dick pics. I have no faith in the world, but I have faith in you, because this is all we can control. So if you see some problem in the world, there's once again 2 options, right? Either I can't do something about this, or I can try. That's it. Those are your 2 options. And that's why I think shit life syndrome can get better, because I have worked with people to address these cognitive biases, and we have moved from there is nothing I can do about this to I can try. And the really sad thing is that even when circumstances improve, it doesn't always lead to better outcomes. So if you look at women who are abused in the household, they're more likely to be abused in romantic relationships. I think something like 1 in 6 women will be sexually or raped, actually. So even sexual assault could be higher. Intimate partner violence, 30.7% of women with ADHD are likely to have intimate partner violence. This is a staggering number. And if you look at this, like, this is bad. And the problem, why does this happen? Why is it that if you were abused once, you are likely to be abused again? Is it because the world is rigged against you? No. This is the really crazy thing. It is because of the way that you engage in relationships. See, when you have a high self-esteem and someone mistreats you, you leave the relationship. But when you are dependent, when your goal is survival, not thriving, then you are willing to tolerate abuse. It's a completely different way of looking at the world. What's the goal? And in shit life syndrome, the goal is survival, not thriving. That creates all kinds of problems. It keeps our life in this weird limbo zone of not actually ending, right? Like, we're struggling along, we're kind of chugging along, but we're never getting anywhere. We're not quitting the race, because once again, I had a brilliant patient who taught me this, who tried to commit suicide 7 times. And I was like, do I need to be worried about you? And he's like, no. I was like, help me understand. Brilliant guy. And he said, well, the 7th time I realized that, like, some part of me does not want to die. I've been trying to kill myself, and something within me is fighting for life. So I'm going to stop fighting that thing. And that's all it took for him. No more suicidality, right? So there's something within you, even if you feel like everything is like lost and whatever, there's something within you that strives. We look at this post and here I am fucking bashing this person, right? I'm saying, oh, look at this cognitive bias, but I want y'all to point out and pay attention to something. This person posted. This person is trying to change. This person is saying my life is unsolvable. Nothing's ever going to end up anywhere. And they're not taking it laying down. It's a huge prognostic sign in the right direction. This is a win. The post may be full of negativity, but the fact that there is a post is a win. And this is our bias, right? So now what I want y'all to do is, if you're listening to this, if you've been listening to this, did you consider that? And if the answer is no, why not? This is bias. So shit life syndrome is not deterministic. I do not believe that. Is the deck stacked against you? Absolutely. Can we count on the world to fix things? I don't know. Big question mark. The world isn't all bad, by the way. It's a lot of good in the world, right? But what I have faith in is y'all. I have faith that if you understand the way that you function, if you understand what your biases are, if you understand the way that you view the world, determine some of the way that the world is, then you can change. Your life can change.
Where is my... Oh no.
Like everyone who's learning how to draw.
Oh no. You're making anatomy harder than it should be.
Thank you to Clip Studio Paint for sponsoring today's video. If you're interested in the free trial, check the description below. Hey, it's me, your favorite artist you're obviously subscribed to. If there's one thing that artists hate more than art, it's anatomy. Anatomy is just one of those things that people feel like they just can't get right. Sometimes they draw their character's arms too short, or maybe their legs are a tad too long. The problems get even worse when we throw foreshortening into the mix. But what if I told you? You're actually making anatomy a lot harder on yourself. Yeah, that's right. Anatomy is actually super easy, but the way you think anatomy works is what's ruining your art. Just a heads up, this tutorial isn't going to show you how to draw every specific body part, because my god, that would take me 2 hours. Imagine how many different body types, how many different art styles, and different angles I'd have to draw for each body part. Instead, this tutorial will teach you the concepts of anatomy and the mindset you need to have when drawing it. You've probably already seen 1,000 YouTube videos and 1,000 how to draw books on how to draw a simple skeleton and draw body parts. But the problem with these books is that they don't teach you critical concepts and critical thinking skills you need to know about drawing anatomy. Before we talk about anatomy, let's first ask ourselves, what is anatomy? Anatomy in art is defined as the structure of living things. This includes stuff like proportions, the way muscles look, the way fat is placed, and where our joints are placed. Anatomy does not include stuff like posing or composition. A lot of beginner artists tend to attribute their issues to anatomy when in reality, the problem is something completely different. For example, in this drawing right here, this guy is sticking his arm out. This is technically anatomically correct, but it just looks weird. You can't see his shoulder or forearm since they're directly behind the hand. The viewer's brain has to kind of interpret how they're positioned, so it kind of just feels awkward to look at. This isn't an anatomy problem, but it's more of a posing problem. The solution would just be to move the hand so you can see the arm. Here's another example where the anatomy doesn't look too bad, but the position of the arm is just very awkward. There's not really much empty space in her pose, so there's no visual balance in the composition. Everything just feels clustered. So this is more of a composition and posing problem. The solution would be to just move her arm so that there's more empty space in the pose. It's important to know the distinction between anatomy and other elements of art so we can more easily identify the core issues of our drawings. So now that we can recognize what isn't considered anatomy, what is considered bad anatomy? Let's get one thing straight. Bad anatomy is subjective. Artists tend to believe that there is a right and wrong way of doing things, but this is a bad mindset to have. Many of these opinions people believe are facts are actually just based on the principles of real life. Art, though, isn't real life, and so the rules of anatomy and proportions are nothing more than a suggestion. In my opinion, the only difference between good and bad anatomy is intention and presentation. An example of intention is creating a character with super big arms. This is technically not feasible in real life, but the point of the big arms is to show that a character is super strong. Another example is if you exaggerate foreshortening and give your character a giant arm to give your drawing a more dynamic feel to it. His arm may look giant, but that's intentional to make the drawing feel more dynamic. Now let's say that you were attempting foreshortening, but you made his arm look flat on accident, or maybe his forearm just looks like a giant balloon. If you said that the character's superpower was that he was able to turn flat or puff up his arms, yeah, that would make sense and it's fine, but if that wasn't your intention, well, you just created bad anatomy. Presentation, on the other hand, means if your character's anatomy looks cohesive enough to look appealing or believable. You can present your anatomy well through things like your drawing's composition, your character's posing, or through your character's design. The big arm guy looks believable because his design clearly shows that he's supposed to be strong, so our brain accepts his anatomy as believable. Now let's say I made a cute girl, but she had longer than average arms and square fingers. Well, it looks weird, doesn't it? It's because through her character's design, there's not really a reason why the character should have long arms. She looks just like an average human, yet she has super long arms, and the simple square fingers clash with the art style of the actual character. Even if these traits were intentional on the artist's part, the viewer's brain won't accept the presentation. If the character's design was different, or if the artist had a more stylized art style, then this design would make more sense. To summarize, what you might believe is bad anatomy is really just an issue of other factors like your character's design, their posing, the drawing's composition, or just inconsistencies from an artist who hasn't practiced their art style enough. So now that we've talked about bad anatomy, what do you need to know to make good anatomy? Well, in my rule book, you only need to know 3 things to draw good anatomy. Number 1, master being able to draw simple shapes at any angle and any perspective. Number 2, be able to look at a picture of a human and break their structure down into shapes, curves, and lines. And number 3, be able to trace. Let's go over rule number 1, simple shapes. The thing beginners tend to always, and I mean always, undervalue are shapes like cubes, cylinders, triangles, and spheres. I had a guy in my shading video tell me how stupid my tutorial was because all I taught was how to shade shapes. And he wanted to learn how to shade useful stuff like hands and bodies. But you know, everything in life is built from shapes. Once you understand how a cylinder casts a shadow, you can then understand how a finger casts a shadow. If you can't even comprehend how to shade a simple cube, what makes you think you can shade an entire human? Master drawing these shapes and trust me, you'll make things a lot easier for yourself. If you're ever bored and don't know what to do, I want you to practice drawing cubes, spheres, and cylinders, and practice making these shapes in every angle and every perspective you can think of. These shapes don't have to look perfect, they just have to at least resemble the shape you're drawing. After you feel like you can draw these shapes in basically any way, start stacking them, start combining them, make them follow the same perspective. Once you feel comfortable with simple shapes, start making your own shapes. Repeat this entire process with just random shapes you make up in your head. The point of this exercise is so you can get used to visualizing a 3D environment. Surprisingly, you can make simple cubes look super dynamic, like this. Now, onto rule number 2. Be able to look at a picture of a human and break their structure down into shapes, curves, and lines. So this rule really depends on what art style you're going for. What I mean by picture of a human is you can basically just use a picture of an actual human, or you can use art pieces by your favorite artists that have an art style that resemble the type of art style that you want. Whether that art style is super cartoony or super realistic, this tip will work for anything. So to show off this rule, I'm going to be using an art piece by a YouTuber that you're obviously subscribed to. So the first thing I'm going to do is hide the background so that it's easier to see what I'm doing. Clip Studio Paint actually has this really cool feature that allows you to easily switch between different variations of the same drawing. If you're a person that likes to have a bunch of different variations of one drawing, instead of having to go and switch between layers manually, this feature allows you to automate it easier. As you can see, I have a version with no colors, no background, and a background. It's a very cool feature that Clip Studio Paint has. So to kind of break down anatomy into simple shapes, curves, and lines, we're going to work backwards from the art process. We're going to kind of reverse engineer it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a forbidden tool called tracing. Tracing for anatomy is actually a very helpful tool because it allows you to more easily visualize the simple curves and lines that artists use when drawing different body parts. So for an example, I'm going to be using the head. I'm going to trace the head. And while I trace the head, I'm going to study what types of curves and lines this artist likes to use when drawing specific parts of the face. So I kind of like to break down my lines into 4 different kinds of lines. So 1, a regular line, Number 2, a C curve. 3, S curve. And then 4, a C curve. So as I start to trace the face, I'm gonna kind of notice what kind of lines this artist likes to use. So for here, I notice that this artist likes to use a very slight C curve for the part right by the eye. For the cheek, I see that they like to use an S curve, like a very slight S curve like that. For the chin, they probably just use a C curve. And then for this part, a little slight S curve actually. And remember, you don't have to connect these lines. You're not doing line art. You're just making a reference for yourself, so you don't have to connect these lines. Well, I can't really see the rest of the head, but I can kind of infer what's going on. Since I know that heads are round, and all of this head is connected, or is covered by hair, and all this hair looks like it's going down a sphere, I'm just going to assume that there's like a giant sphere in here. And from like a bunch of tutorials that you use, you could probably guess that a head is a sphere. And just like that, we traced the head.
Oh my god.
So now what we can do now is break it down into simple shapes.
Oh, hello.
So as we
the
saw up
Corbin.
here, this is a sphere, so what I can do is just complete the sphere.
Hello. How art thou?
Now, a sphere can't be 3D without like a visual indicator of which way it's kind of like pointing. So using the eyes as my reference, I can create a line that goes down like this, because I can assume this is the middle of the head. The eyes are like this. And then I can create another horizontal line that goes through the middle of the eyes like that. And just like that, I was able to break down the head into a sphere shape. Now I'm going to break these curves into just simple lines so that I don't have to really pay attention to their curvature. I'm just going to break it down into simple lines. So for each curve, I'm basically just going to break it down into a small little line. Actually, I might not touch this one. And so just like that, now I broke down the cheeks of my head into simple lines. And I have the sphere. And now, after I have this reference that I created for myself, I'm going to try to replicate it without tracing. So that way, I tend to memorize and understand what all of these curves and lines and shapes are used for. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a circle. Then I'm going to try to get those guidelines of the circle that I had, so like this little crosshair thing. Then I'm going to try to replicate the lines that I had. And remember, this doesn't really have to be perfect. If it's not one-to-one perfect, then you can just say that it's a different perspective that you drew. And just like that, I created something that looks pretty similar to what I had originally. So this looks pretty similar. And now I'm going to kind of lower the opacity of this head. And now I'm going to bring out these lines that I had. And this goes back to rule number 3, be able to trace. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over these lines that I created, and I'm going to try to replicate these simple curves that I had over here. Remember when we broke down our curves into C curves, S curves, and all that? Well, now, using these lines that I have, I'm going to just basically try to replicate those same curves. So this line I remember was a C curve. This line right here was basically an S curve. It was a very slight S curve. This curve was a C curve. And then this curve was also like a slight S curve. And then maybe I can just fill in, create the rest of the head. And just like that, we have a head that we could use, and it perfectly replicates the type of art style that I want. So now I can just go ahead and draw literally everything that I want for my head. Bam, that's my character. She has a very pushed back hairline. If you don't really have a specific artist to reference, check out Pose Maniacs. Pose Maniacs has so many poses that you can reference off of. They have different categories of poses, and even the poses for different genders. The coolest part is that if you have Clip Studio Paint, you can open these poses from the browser into Clip Studio Paint. Just click on the button, click on what drawing figure you have, and just like that, you have a body to reference of and follow these steps with. Remember, if you want to try it out for yourself, check out the description below. You can do this with any body part. As another example, I'm going to be doing this with the hands, something that's very intricate. All I'm going to do is I'm going to trace over the hand, trying to pay attention to what lines that this artist likes to use. So like that, I'm going to do the finger. So I can see that this artist for here likes to use an S curve. Over here, they like to use an S curve, C curve, inverse C curve, an S curve, and then a C curve. Then I'm going to break these curves into simple lines. So 1 line, 2 line, I'm going to just keep this as a curve, another line, another line. And then I'm going to try to break these lines down into shapes. So I can see that like these shapes are pretty much cylinders. A finger, if you think about it, is pretty much like a cylinder and another cylinder. So I'm just going to break them down into cylinders. Now I have this reference that I'm going to try to replicate on this side of my drawing. So I got a circle. I'm going to create a cylinder. And then another cylinder from this cylinder. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And now I'm going to hide the opacity. I'm going to bring out those curves that I had for each line. And I'm going to try to replicate those curves. So this line was a slight S curve like this. This line was a C curve. This line was an S curve. This line was a C curve. And this line was an S curve. Hold up. Yeah, this line was an S curve and then a C curve. And see how I basically trace over this initial shape that I have? You just basically want to trace over it. And just like that, I perfectly replicated the finger that an artist that I liked used. Over time, as you reference more and more art, you're gonna start associating patterns with a lot of the human body parts. Oh, when I'm drawing a thigh, it's basically just a C curve and an S curve. Drawing a forearm, it's just 2 S curves that slightly go inward towards the end. When I'm drawing the back of a torso, oh, it's just 3 S curves or 3 bumps. You're gonna start memorizing and kind of getting the gist of how many bumps and curves a human body part has. So hopefully now you're a master at creating shapes and you've memorized a lot of the curves a human body has. So how do you mix these two together? Well, remember from rule 2 that all you have to do is take those patterns that you learn and trace them over these shapes that you're creating. You are picking shapes that most resemble the body.
Why is Awaken asking for big titty anime girls on my stream?
Shortening arm. So I'm just gonna make a post.
No, Awaken.
So
Awaken. I don't know.
Awaken wants big titty anime girls.
What I associate with the shoulder is a sphere. I'm gonna make the sphere a little bit smaller because I kind of want to exaggerate my foreshortening.
Why does Awaken want big titty anime
girls? What I'm gonna
girls?
do is I'm gonna create a cylinder, and this is like mastering perspective. I'm gonna make the end of my cylinder bigger because I want my cylinder to look like that it's going forward.
No.
Then I'm gonna create
what about the other
right
ones?
here, and then I'm gonna create another cylinder going more forward like that. And then I'm gonna create just like a rectangle.
Why does he want this? I thought that he was
because I usually associate the palm of my hand with a rectangle like that.
I did.
And now I basically have the shapes I want to use, so I'm gonna lower the opacity.
I'm kidding.
And now this is where associating curves with certain body parts comes into play. So usually when I'm creating my shoulder, I usually associate my shoulder with like a simple C curve. Then for my upper arms, I usually associate them with a curve like this. So this is kind of like a 3 curve. And then what I'm basically gonna do is trace over this line of the cylinder. I'm gonna trace over it. If you need to go a little bit off model, that's fine. If you like want to make your arm thicker, you can go a little bit above or a little bit below if you want to make it skinnier. But generally try to follow the direction of this line. So I'm going to create a 3 curve. I'm also going to do the same over here.
Wait, what's he doing right now?
And now for the forearm, usually when I'm drawing the forearm, I associate it with a curve.
I have not been listening to this guy's like video
like this.
At all. Like I've just had like random videos just kind of playing in the background. Perfectionism is ruining your art. Give me a... Why has this become a genre? The I Can Fix Her visual novels. Is that it? Oh.
Can you share profile pics?
This There's no way that he said that. Alright, let's see. This guy's trolling people on Monkey. What is this? Give me the art. Give me the art videos. Ooh. How I draw faces and heads.
Big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video.
Thank you,
In
Squarespace.
this video, I'm going to show you a method on how I draw the face and the head. I'm also going to be showing you guys a study technique on how I'm able to draw the face in any angle. While also sharing some guide on how I personally stylize.
How do you personally stylize?
So the short answer for this video is going to be references. But the longer answer is techniques and drawing methods.
References?
We'll explore in this video.
What was that you just did? You did
The way I
a...
do it can be broken down into 3 phases.
Why is my
Method,
pen white?
shapes, anatomy structure, and stylization.
You did
These
like
concepts
something
are
like
easy to
this,
understand
and then you
if
did
you're
like something
going
like
to
this, and then you did it this, and then you did
Let's
it
start off
that,
with the
and
basic
then you did
method called the
it...
Loomis method. You've probably heard this a million
The
times.
Loomis
The reason being is
method.
it's the most simple but solid method to draw the face. There are tons of other ways that you could draw the head, but I've started drawing with this one, and I've seen most professionals apply this method, especially with anime and manga. You see, it's impossible to draw the face without any anatomy.
Why'd he use the horse from Berserk?
Have drawing methods like the Loomis method that can help us get a hint of
No.
anatomy without overloading our thankfully
Where is he
manga.
saying this
It's the
at?
most simple but solid method to draw the face. There are tons of other ways that you could draw the head,
wait.
but I've started drawing with this one, and I've seen most professionals apply this method, especially with anime and manga.
What a piece of shit. He used the healer hero, and he used the horse from Berserk. Oh my god. Does anybody in the comments say anything? No, none of them. What is this?
This is a CHC room. Oh my fucking god.
I struggle with head. It must came down to getting the outline correct. What's your... This guy has 300 subscribers? What do you do? Oh, gacha games? I'm sorry, I don't play gacha games. I cannot play gacha. I do not feel like wasting my money. I do not want to waste my money. Wasting money is not for me. The drawing circle for is so true. Sorry, this is only for I can do so. Some good other things. Sorry, doing the structures and not just say use the Loomis method. Okay. Maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. 4 months ago. Your voice is so calming, but the edits are so unhinged. Yes. Somebody saw.
You see, it's impossible to draw the face without any anatomy knowledge. Thankfully, we have drawing methods like the Loomis method that can help us get a hint of anatomy
Loomis
without
method.
overloading our brain too much. Okay, so the first step is draw a circle. Make it at least a decent circle. Not like this one, or this one,
Okay.
or this one.
2,000 years later.
Like this.
Okay,
It's also very important to look at this not
let's
just
draw
a
a
circle,
circle.
but a sphere. In fact, always think in 3-dimensional. You don't have to draw that.
Okay, first we're gonna draw the circle. Okay. Gotta use my shoulder. Let's use the shoulder. We gotta use our shoulder to draw. Do you know why, Xavier? Do you know why we use our shoulder to draw? Oh, he's not there. Maybe
I am.
No, you're not, you bastard. Okay. Wait, ooh, what's that? What's that? Seeking answers from the Chief of Justice. Okay, let's see. I'm almost about to lose my streak in Duolingo. This is not good. Let's do that right quick. Toi la ming is I am me. Okay. Let's go on Duolingo. Okay. I don't want to talk to the waiter. Let's do this, yes. How do I do it?
Anh ấy nói tiếng Việt.
I can't listen. I can't listen right now.
Nói Việt.
Nói tiếng. Teacher, I don't know. I can't remember. Is teacher and try? Calvin, damn.
Vâng.
Vâng. Vì
là giáo viên.
No,
bác sĩ.
Bác sĩ. Yes. The teacher's Vietnamese. Calvin là nói Viet. Yes, I'm getting it right.
Cô ấy nói tiếng Anh
I don't only have 3 hearts. I should have 5. Okay. Doctor is Bak. Yes.
Anh
ấy
là người. Anh.
She is my teacher. Kawai. Sheila is Yavian teacher. My Kua toy. Yeah.
Vâng. Hộ chiếu của tôi.
Right? Vâng. Hộ chiếu của tôi. What is this? Kalai La Noi Vietnam. I speak Vietnamese and English. 29. She is my teacher. Kalai La Yao. Was it Gao Vien or Gao Vien? Yeah. Gao Vien. I spelled it right? Gao Vien. Yeah, I did. My teacher speaks Vietnamese and English. Gao Vien. I speak English. What? The teacher is Vietnamese. shit, that's a it's a Sharpie. Cao vien la noi Viet. No? I spelled Nui wrong. N-G-U-O-I. I spelled it N-U. He speaks Vietnamese.
Anh ấy nói tiếng Việt.
Teacher Yao Vien. I did it. I have done it 88%. I am fluent. 66-day streak. As you can see, I fucked up. No, I did not. Viet, no. I'm in bronze. I can get promoted. Look at these people. 400. How'd you do that? Wait, what is this? Oh. It's the flag. Okay, let's do one more. I don't know how to say teacher. Okay, let's see.
Sensei.
No, in Vietnamese.
Sensei.
Friends. I don't know how to say friends. Bo is father. Ban is table. And I is brother. Am I stupid? Maybe it's Ban.
Bạn.
Ban. Oh, bat. Wait, what is table? And what is bowl? Am I stupid? Wait. Bat. Vietnamese. Bat. Bat meaning? No. Bat. No. Ban. Ban could be team, crew. So is that like slang? And then bat. It's like capture, apprehend, nab. I'm remembering that wrong then. I guess it means
Chúng tôi
friends.
muốn một bàn cho hai người.
Chúng tôi muốn
Một
is what does chúng mean?
chúng
Oh, we. So we want a table for high is 2 people, right?
Bố
anh ấy
Is he?
buổi tối
phở
đã
PC may be at risk.
Table is ban. Oh, I guess
bàn.
I'm not taking into account the apostrophes like is
Thích.
thing.
Vi, đây là phở của bạn.
Đây là phở của bạn. Vì đây là phở. So it would be, here is your pho, right?
Đây
Is, yeah,
là
here.
của bạn.
And then this kuban is your, okay, soup.
Súp. Bạn ăn mì phải không?
Ban ăn mì phải con. Do you eat phải con? Do you eat noodles, right? Or wait, no, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Đường. Đói. Hai.
Bố. Bạn có súp phải không?
Bạn có súp phải không? Do phải không? Do you have soup? Bạn có soup phải không? Oh my god. 4 is bon.
4. Bạn muốn 5 tách cà phê phải không?
Bạn muốn... Oh, friends. Bạn muốn 5 tách cà phê. Do you nam tak I don't know what that is. This cup that was
Nam.
So do you want 5 cups of coffee? Yes.
Chúng tôi.
Bowl is about.
Bát.
Want
muốn.
Like.
Thích. Đá. Mẹ.
Table is
Bàn. Vui lòng cho 3 tách trà.
Vui lòng is please. Tectra. So that's ba. 3 cups of tea, please. 5
5.
Num. Okay. I made no mistakes, but I needed help. Okay. That's enough of Duolingo for today. I've earned my XP. Okay. Keep it up for the June badge. No. Okay, Duolingo is done. Back to this. How long have we been streaming for? 1 hour and 39. Or rather, 1 hour and 40 minutes now. Okay, so we've maintained our streak. My phone is about to die. And that's not good. Okay. That's about it for today. Let me see. Thank you for watching, whoever is in the chat, chilling out.
You're welcome.
Thank you. If you're not subscribed or following me on Twitch and or YouTube, go ahead and do so. Same username, Odessa Senpai. Thank you for watching. Please support the channel, or I'll find you. Goodbye.